What's up everyone on the internet? Thank you for making this video party. I am so excited because we are finally in the year 2023. And I figured, you know what better way to start off the new year than to talk about one of cinema's most famous science fiction films, 2001 A Space Odyssey. So even though this movie says 2001, it actually came out in 1968 and was actually directed by Stanley Kubrick, who for years I have only associated him with one of my favorite horror films of all time, The Shining. And for the longest time I have been trying to watch this movie because I have been told that if you really are a film fan, you gotta watch this movie at least once in your life. Well, I finally managed to make time, and after watching this film, I gotta say, both visually and musically, this film is breathtaking. But before we get into that, let's talk about the overall story. So the movie opens up very interestingly on prehistoric Earth, where we follow a tribe of apes just living their normal lives, which consists of sleeping, eating, and fighting other tribes. Well, on one particular morning, out of nowhere, the apes wake up to a random monolith just standing right in front of them. And what soon starts off as chaos, panic, and everyone freaking out as to what the heck is going on, it soon turns to curiosity as you see these tribe of apes suddenly become curious and are now interested in this random monolith that is standing before them. And the music being played, oh my god, I have never heard something that is both horrifying and mysterious before in my life. You know, now that I think about it, there's practically very few instruments being played throughout this entire scene, except the only thing you hear is this choir that is slowly raising their voices as the scene is playing out, as you're watching the monkeys just freaking out around this monolith before they soon become curious and just accept this monolith that just came right before them. And then you cut to a scene where you begin to see the apes now learning on how to use tools before hearing one of the most iconic film scores of all time, because I'm pretty sure you must have heard some rendition of this song at some point in your life. Ba-dum, 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 dun dun, dun 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 dun. And just like that, we cut to the future where the human race has now achieved space exploration. That quick cut between the past and the future pretty much determines on whether or not you're going to understand the overall premise of the film. More on that later. It's also a moment that makes you question on whether or not you're gonna like this film. Because when I watched this with my family, when that moment happened, there was some mixed reactions among us, where I was pretty excited as to what was going on. But for everyone else, they were kind of confused, because while the beginning is pretty slow, to have the setting just drastically change from the past to the future, everyone was pretty confused. That's also one thing you should know about this film, is that it is slow. Now, in my opinion, there are two types of slow storytelling. There's a slow burn, and then there's a slow movie. A slow burn is when you're pretty much keeping the story at a steady pace in the first few acts, because you are laying the groundwork and you're setting everything up for the third act, which begins to ramp things up. And once you get to the ending of the third act, you feel a huge payoff because of all the groundwork that had to be laid out in the beginning. When you're talking about a slow movie, however, the story is kept at a steady pace throughout the entire film in all three acts of the film. And once you get to the ending, that's sort of it, and you don't get that much of a big payoff. Basically, all of this revolves around how you feel about the third act of the film, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. Anyway, after we get past the ape scene, we soon begin to see how this film is a technical marvel in terms of how they depict the future, more specifically on how they handle the spaceships. Now, some of you may be wondering, wait, Adam, how is this a technological marvel? I mean, look at the ships, they don't do that much. Well, you gotta remember, this film came out almost a decade before Star Wars. At a time, visual effects were not up to par as to what we saw in Star Wars. So to see something like this on a grand scale, it was a huge achievement at the time, and some would say that this is pretty much the Ben-Hur of science fiction films. But going back to the film, the story then reintroduces the monolith, and again, it just appears out of nowhere with the most horrifying music anyone has ever heard. And at this point, I'm like, what the hell is with this monolith? It's freaking me out at this point. This thing is pretty much scary. It's stalking us at this point. Then the movie cuts to the future where we now see that the human race has progressed in space travel and are searching for the next monolith, where they believe that it'll lead to the next stage in human evolution. Are you seeing a pattern now? But anyway, as we get into the second act, we're introduced to one of science fiction's most famous antagonists, HAL, the ship's AI. Now, those are some fighting words, because when you think about science fiction antagonists, or let's just say sci-fi villains, you think of Darth Vader, you think of Thanos, and when you see this label being applied to a character that is an AI, you think of Ultron, you think of the Terminator, you think of Skynet. But when you look at HAL, you can see that he is a fully functioning AI whose main purpose is to make sure that this mission to the monolith is successful. Now, some of you may also be wondering, wait, Adam, he killed some of the crew members. How is that successful? Well, you gotta remember that HAL is a computer and is seeing things on a logical level to where he can already see the faults in humanity and has already calculated that for the good of the mission, the humans have to be removed from the equation. And I love how this character serves as a symbolic representation of how the technology that humanity creates will ultimately lead to humanity's downfall. Even when they're pulling the plugs out of him, you can see how instead of screaming like any other typical villain, he just accepts the reality of the situation, and his death is both emotionless and haunting at the same time. Anyway, as we get to the end of the third act of the film, this is where we get to see how this movie is visually artistic, where we see how knowledge of the universe is perceived through the eyes of humanity. But while the first couple of minutes of this scene are pretty amazing, the scene tends to drag on way too long to the point where you kind of start to get a headache. You know, now that I think about it, there are 3 stages that you go through when you watch this scene. The first stage is, oh my god, this is so visually stunning. The second stage is, this is some dope weed. And the third stage is, oh my god, can we please move on? This is taking way too long. Which then leads us to the ending, where to this day, people are still trying to figure out what the ending of the movie means. But here's my overall pitch. If you paid attention throughout the film, you'll see that whenever the monolith appears, humanity takes a huge step in evolution. We saw in the beginning where the apes learned how to use tools. We saw in the middle where the humans learned how to achieve intergalactic space travel. And we saw in the ending where the remaining astronaut becomes the star baby. So looking at the ending and the entire film in general, you could say that the overall premise of the story is about evolution. And while that may be the main premise of the story, I feel like the overall film in general was focusing on the technological advancements and visual effects. So for viewers who are unable to figure out the overall message of the film, it is completely understandable that they feel this movie left with no payoff. Which then makes you wonder on whether or not this is a slow movie or a slow burn. Now for me, I consider it a slow burn because I was able to pick up on these things, and by the time I got to the ending, I felt the ending left a huge payoff considering on how I was paying attention to a lot of these things that were happening throughout the film. But for everyone else who was confused, I can understand that they would see this as a slow movie. But whether I liked it or not, I'm happy knowing that I finally got to see this movie after so long. Now, would I recommend this movie? It really depends on who I'm recommending it to. If you are a film fan like me who appreciates the art of cinema, then I highly recommend you watch this film and cross it off your movie list. But if you're someone who's into the more modern sci-fi pop culture movies, then chances are you may not like this one. And if you tried watching this movie but couldn't finish it because it was too long for you, my hat's off to you because you at least tried. Well, that's gonna do it for this video, guys. That was my overall review on 2001 A Space Odyssey. If you like what you saw, click the subscribe button so you always updates from this channel. I'll see you next time with a brand new video. Bye-bye.